Heather Marlow, City and Borough Lands and Resources Manager. The borough, I'll talk a little bit about the borough and our role, and then we'll get into West Douglas. The borough is a large landowner. We have over 23,000 acres that we manage for multiple purposes, some of which is resource development, some of which is future community expansion, which means residential areas, school sites, future roads, those types of facilities. And then some of it is in a stewardship capacity, and those in particular are your natural resources such as fish streams and eagle nests and other resources that we enjoy here in Southeast. So we have multiple purposes that we manage for, and we have an inventory of all of our land holdings. That's public information. It's on our website. And for each land parcel, we have an identifier of what that parcel is held for. If it's held for future development, if it's held for current development, or if it's held for stewardship purposes. So that is just a real synopsis of what we do in the lands office and the holdings that the city has. The city got the majority of its holdings through the municipal land selection process. And what that process is it's an outcome of statehood, but it was really realized in the 70s, where the legislature assigned a ratio of land to population for all the different communities. And then those communities had the ability to identify properties that they wanted to bring into their ownership, once again, for future growth and expansion. So you will see that many of the boroughs and municipalities in Alaska are large landholders, which is in contrast to what you will see down in the majority of the states, where public entities, counties, municipalities are trying to dispose of their land holdings. The city actually maintains them for multiple generations, and that is also the premise that each municipality and each borough gets to decide on their own if they want to do mass land sales and sell them off quickly, if they want to keep an inventory for time, however they want to manage it. So that is how we got the majority of our land holdings. Our 23,000 acres is through the municipal selection process. And what happened when we went through in the 70s is, those of you that are old-time Juneauites and are developers, a lot of the easy land to access and a lot of the rich land that was easy to develop, was selected either through homesteading or mining or the just natural sequence of events for community expansion in Juneau and Douglas. So when the municipality went through and started to select our lands, what we found is that we were almost kind of the second tier of ownership, that everything that fronted on Glacier Highway, that everything that was in the downtown core area had already been selected for private purposes. And so a lot of our land is challenged because it does not have road frontage, it does not have utilities. It's that next tier of land back from the private ownerships along the major transportation and utility corridors. And then above us, typically throughout town, above us is the U.S. Forest Service. So that's some of the challenges that the city faces in the municipal selection lands that we have, is bringing them online with the standard access and utility connections that kind of first tier of land ownership enjoys already. And so this is a shot behind me of West Douglas. West Douglas is kind of a term that we've just started to use. I don't know, another term may come up in the future. But what this is showing on the lower left-hand side with the end of the red line is the existing terminus of North Douglas Highway. And that terminus, and I have handed out a couple of pages that are on your tables you may have to share, but that terminus currently is in Gold Belt property. And I'll show you some maps here in a second. But what happens for the most part is that from this terminus down towards the water and up to the right to Middle Creek and beyond is Gold Belt ownership. And they got this through their ANCSA selection. And so the city is the immediate landowner above their coastal ownership. And this area is not served by road or utilities. So back in 1995, the city and Gold Belt started to work together on a conceptual development plan that was adopted by the Assembly for how we could bring our properties online, meaning road, utilities, power, with the most coordination, the best use of investment for dollars, and how to achieve multiple purposes between different entities that may and do have different goal sets. So that's a document that we're very proud of. It's a document that we continue to use. We've checked in with Gold Belt recently, and they're supportive of the document and the outcomes and the goals still. So it's an active document, even though it was adopted in 1995. And basically what happened as a result of that planning process is we adopted a document that's called the West Douglas Conceptual Plan. And for people that are particularly interested in what that plan contains, it's posted on the CBJ website. Just go onto the website and do a search for West Douglas Conceptual Plan, and the full document will come up for you. So once we started in on that conversation with Gold Belt, what we found is that this is going to be a long-term plan. This is not something that's going to be developed in a couple years. This is something that's going to come online over time, and as opportunities present themselves, we'll consult with one another and move forward on areas that we find common agreement on. So one of the things that happened some time ago is that I think it was Senator Murkowski that Gold Belt approached for access monies to West Douglas, and we went back and forth a little bit with how that money was going to be expended, and we looked at the second crossing as a potential use of that money, and then we ended back here on the city and Gold Belt property for extending the road. So once again, this diagram's on your table. Here's the current terminus of Douglas Highway. We have a checkerboard pattern of ownership with Gold Belt on the coast. Then you have city land above, and then you have Forest Service land yet again above that. So once again, very common pattern of three ownerships, with the city being in the second tier. And so what happened is that DOT manages its personnel and its resources for its purposes. Extending West Douglas Highway was not high on their priority list, and so the city approached the legislature to get the money reappropriated into a grant to the city from DOT so that the city could take over project management of this road extension project. So we have $3 million that was transferred in our direction from the legislature in this last session. And we've initiated all the paperwork that we need to have that money transferred, and we will be the project manager for the extension of the road. $3 million is going to get us about 2.5 miles of Pioneer Road. Pioneer Road is something similar to what you might see out at Cascade Point. You have a gravel road section about 20 feet in width with some developed pullouts on the side at good visibility points. Working with Gold Belt, we looked at 3 different alignments for this road corridor, and this is what's on your tables. But we looked at a lower route that would go entirely through Gold Belt property. We looked at a middle route that would be mostly on city property, but some portions on Gold Belt. And then we looked at an upper route here that would be entirely on city property. You can see on the sheets that some of these natural features are called out. We have wetlands, we have the former golf course information, including their access and their wetland plans. We have fish streams, we have eagle nests. We also have some high velocity water courses that come through. They're not trickles, they come through with mass force, and they have some pretty broad gravel beds that we need to span with bridges. So that's really what a lot of our field work was what are our opportunities and our constraints, what are our cost estimates, and what do we think is most likely to be permittable and constructible. So working through our engineering team and working with Gold Belt, what we've done is we've selected the upper corridor. So this corridor that goes entirely on city property is the corridor that we've selected to permit, design, and build. And we've done that with Gold Belt's blessing. This is the second page of the corridor analysis. This is Middle Creek here. And what we anticipate with $3 million is, once again, we'll get about 2.5, 2 3/4 miles in, which will put us just shy of Middle Creek. We're not going to get all the way to Middle Creek. And what the thought is with this first phase, is we want to get past the Peterson Creek drainage. Peterson Creek drainage was inventoried back during the Totem Creek Golf Course process as a high-producing salmon stream. It's also got quite a few tributaries that improve water quality and habitat, so all of those need to be protected as well. And then we have a number of stream crossings that we have to avoid for our permitting purposes. So there's quite a bit of information that went into this process. But our primary goal for this first phase, and I'll call this phase 1A of probably Z17 phases before we finally get to the conceptual plan development. But this first phase, the primary goals are to get past the Peterson Creek drainage area, get past those sensitive areas. We believe we can get permitted for that. And then what that also does is it allows us at a future date to consider whether or not we want to continue the road corridor on this upper alignment, or if we want to start and come down to this middle alignment, which is closer to Gold Belt property, closer to the coast. That's the next decision, not this phase, but we're queuing ourselves up to make that decision next time. There's advantages and disadvantages to staying on the high route and coming down to the low route, but what we anticipate is that this also puts Gold Belt in a very good position to develop its properties. Once we get past the Peterson Creek drainage, it's a pretty short run down to Gold Belt property, and they have some ideas or some goals to achieve on their development areas. So there's a single page that I handed out. It's got a black and white graphic on one side, and then on the back side it shows the development area that the city and the Gold Belt have called out as our first node of development, that's where we would cluster any sort of initial development. And what those development nodes may contain are all identified in the conceptual plan. But the thought is to do a mix of land uses, commercial, industrial, residential, port, tourism, barge support. I mean, there's different land uses that are called out for use in that plan. And so what this does is it strategically places us at a point where Gold Belt can choose their own road alignment and bring on their own property necessarily on their own schedule. They don't have to be working with the city at that point once we get that road selection in there. So this is the page that I'm referring to, and it gets you into development area 1A, and once again, if you look into the plan, you'll see what all the different ideas are for the different development areas that are out there. The previous page, this black and white page, really shows our entire planning area up here in this corner. So if this is the current end of the road, our planning area is past Point Hilda, and Middle Creek would be about here. So really this is maybe 20 to 25% of the entire planning area that we're bringing on with this first phase. And so I'll just get to the question that I'm asked the most often. As soon as I start talking about this, the first question is, when is the city going to sell land? And that's really not the goal at this time for this phase. We do have areas that are identified in the plan for residential sales, for commercial sales, but it's not in this first portion. We can talk a little bit about where we are going to be selling land. If it's not here, then where is it? We can talk about that, but I'll just kind of jump ahead on that question. If some people are interested in siting development in this area, I would encourage you to work with Gold Belt. If you have ideas for uses or purposes there, I think that's really the way that the city is looking for this first section in particular. Looking at my notes here. I'll stop there. There's more that I can say, but I think that people are probably interested in some of the bigger questions rather than the details in the fine print. Sir?
Yeah, is Gold Belt going to contribute anything to the road, seeing it's all we're property road we have
Gold Belt is not contributing to the road at this time. We're using public dollars, and what would happen is after you get past this pioneer stage is eventually, maybe it's phase 4, phase 5, what we need to do is we need to turn this in to a true public highway, such as the remainder of Douglas Highway. And so that is a public responsibility to build public highways, and we would probably do that in conjunction with DOT and federal money.
Also, the Coast Guard's out there. That'd be a good source of funds also.
Yeah, I've talked to the Coast Guard. They're interesting. I mean, they have high turnover in their staff. They didn't realize they had ownerships out here, and then once they looked into it, they said that they had transferred most of it to Gold Belt, and I asked Gold Belt, and they weren't quite sure that they had gotten it. So I hear you about the Coast Guard. I don't know that they know that, but yeah. Yes?
The first 2.5 miles, phase 1A, is that going to include utilities going out to that, just roughing out the road?
Just roughing out the Pioneer Road. There is power, for those of you who haven't been out there in the last couple of years, there is power station that AEL&P put in just off the terminus of the highway, so it's pretty easy to extend power. But any sort of sewer or water system that we would put out here would be disconnected from the municipal plants. And so it would be local, like on-site wells and drain fields, local processing. And the municipality is, I'm not going to say stretched, but we are challenged to address the systems that we have now. And so we're not looking to expand those systems at this point. Derek.
Heather, when is the permitting process going to take place, and how long do you envision it taking?
So the permitting process, we've already selected a contractor to help us out with that. R&M, I believe, is our selected contractor to help us out with that. We've started framing the process to go through, so I would say that we're in it because we have a contractor that we're paying. And then as long as it may take, I would say like a year or so to get it permitted, we have to do preliminary design first, and then you do your permitting, and then they tell you what you're left over to go and build. So it's a bit of a back and forth, an iterative process on how you get to it, but I hope to be through it in a year to 18 months at the outset.
There's been talk in the past about road extending Eagle Crest Road. Is that off the table with this, or is it still an alternative or an additional plan that's being looked at?
Extending Eagle Crest Road further up the mountain, over the backside. I have not heard of plans to do that. I've heard of connecting a trail system from the top of Eagle Crest down to this road corridor, or potentially even some recreational cabins that the city might install down on our properties. And I think that the Eagle Crest Master Plan picks up on that concept of constructing trail connections to the backside of West Douglas that would tie into this road system and provide additional recreational opportunities. I haven't heard about the road, though. Yep.
You mentioned the North Douglas crossing, but it seems to me that you can't get much further on developing this road until there is another crossing to Douglas.
Yeah.
Is that part of the plan, or is North Douglas crossing off the table?
North Douglas Crossing is a conversation all in itself. But, I mean, everyone knows the story. It's the chicken and the egg story, and we've gone back and forth, and whether it's a chicken or an egg or what happens first. And I think that, reading the Assembly's body language, we're working on this road. We're going to try and create demand, and then we'll go back to the bridge conversation. Rick?
So how much land represents that development area 1A? And I noticed development area 1B is actually in close proximity to the current on the road. What is the plan for that as far as this road extension?
So 1A, I'm just kind of doing an eyeball here on what 1A is. 1A is probably a good, 100 acres or more for there. And I think that the last time I read the plan, it was several different ideas from Gold Belt, and I'll let Derek speak to it a little bit. I heard tourism in that area. I also heard some mining support, potential for mining support in Lynn Canal. Do you have anything else you want to add to that, Derek?
That's about 120 acres approximately. In the conceptual plan, it talks about maybe a combination of residential, commercial development. At this point, we don't have any specific development plans. That'll evolve over time, I imagine.
Yeah.
And how about development area 1B? When is that going to be
right.
part of the?
So 1B is identified for residential and recreational purposes. That's on city property, and in order for us to do a land disposal, we would need some sort of utility capacity out there. And I think what we're thinking is there's a domino effect of once Gold Belt sees development on their property, that those utility concerns will have to be addressed, and then therefore we can partner and start to bring those properties online. So once again, kind of long-term process, but you can see it playing out in a domino effect over time. Others? Others?
How about, you said that there could be immediate land disposal here, so what is the plan? Is there any land coming online
Yeah.
from the city that's within service areas? Anything near a bus route, anything near water, sewer?
Yeah. So the city, and I'm glad you asked that question. So the city is getting ready to go back to a conversation that we started this spring. We have identified what I'm calling buildable lands, buildable municipal lands. We have some very large land holdings between DZ School and Lemon Creek Correctional Center, that whole forested hillside above the Meadow Complex, above Pinewood Park, that's all municipal property. And so we've gone through and done a subdivision analysis looking at how many homes we could site, what the utility costs were, how we would do land disposals. And that's one of two areas that we are considering for residential development. The other area is Peterson Hill. We recently brought sewer across Mendenhall River into the Industrial Boulevard area and have extended it up to the crest of Peterson Hill on the Glacier Highway corridor. So we own quite a bit of that hillside between Glacier Highway and Back Loop, between Mendenhall River and Auk Lake. And so we've also done a subdivision study there and see almost the same potential that we see in Schweitzer for costs and the number of dwelling units that we can bring online. So what's getting ready to happen in November or December is we'll be going back to the Assembly with staff analysis and recommendation on which area to bring online for permitting and development first. I know right now I can tell you that the staff recommendation is Peterson Hill. That may change. The Assembly may tell us to go to Schweitzer. I don't know how that's going to turn out yet. It would take us about the same amount of time to do our process. Once we get an okay from the Assembly, we'd need about a year, maybe 18 months to do the permitting and design, then go into construction. So I'm thinking we could be in land sales 3, 4, 5 years out. One of the concerns that I've heard from the contractor community, the development community, is won't that compete with private development and private enterprise? And what we're thinking right now is for our municipal lands or our buildable lands, that the focus will be on affordable housing. And affordable housing is defined as a price point of $250,000 or less for ownership. And then it's 30% of average community income for rent. And so when we do land disposals and when we do land sales, we will be having a focus on doing disposals to affordable housing proposals so as not to compete with the open market or free market.
I guess a follow-up to that, Heather, is I guess we're pretty lucky that you're a Juneau girl having grown up here to see these issues, because the first time I saw it, the plat ideas for Peterson Hill was in about 2002. So there's just, you get asked the same questions over and over, but it's such a long process to get to where you actually start selling the land.
Yeah, so what has held up Peterson Hill to date is the sewer issue, that we can't do the density without the sewer, and the sewer just came like 2 years ago, and so now we're ready to move forward. I am heartened by the fact that we do have enough money in CIP funding right now to do a full development and get 100 dwelling units online. So that means road, sewer, water, power, creating subdivision parcels, all of that is funded. We just need direction from the Assembly on which property to invest in. Yes.
So your plan is just to put in the utilities in the roads, but no construction?
No construction. We will solicit for bids and solicit for projects. We'll be looking for certain attributes of those responses to our solicitations, affordability being one of them. And then we will make awards to properties and projects that forward community goals for housing.
Where does the master plan come in on this, for instance, citing the sewage treatment plant in this area?
It's in the plan, it's in the conceptual plan if you read through it. But basically, it's each one of those development nodes is going to require its own standalone facilities, its own well system, its own treatment plant system. It's so far out in the future to get that hooked up to the municipal system that we just need to plan for it to be on site. And that's work that we'll do in coordination with Gold Belt. So we don't necessarily have exact locations, but we have different attributes called out of where we would likely center those facilities. And each development node is likely to have one. Linda.
So Heather, so in a year and a half, you anticipate the Pioneer Road being finished?
In a year and a
Or
half,
just feasibility?
yeah. In a year and a half, I expect it to be designed, permitted, and out for contract to build. Yeah. And it will be managed similar to Cascade Point. It will be gated off in the wintertime. We do not intend to do winter maintenance out there. And it will be open in the summertime.
It's going to cause a lot of additional traffic along the Douglas Highway as this is being constructed. And has there been any thought about the bench road eventually being put in above like it is going out the road to have a bench road?
And I think that would come in once we see traffic volumes that start to justify a second crossing, that those two pieces go together in my mind. Once you get that bridge in, whether there's additional development in West Douglas or not, once you bring that bridge to Douglas, you're going to see an increase in traffic on Douglas Highway. And so the bench road really, to me, is tied to the second crossing as much as it is to West Douglas development. Brad?
How much is the actual construction of the road relative to the total project? So like 80% for planning and development and 20% for construction?
I think it's about 80% for construction is the thumbnail that we try and work with. Of course, I mean, a lot of this stuff is out of our control. How many regulatory reviews and proofs and justifications and reports and stuff we have to do drills down into that construction.
I mean, that's over $1 million a mile for a pioneer road. And there's a lot of logging construction that goes on, and those were built for far less than that. They're far more road.
Right, but those roads aren't leading towards a state highway, and that's what we're designing and leading towards is a continuation of a highway corridor rather than just a temporary logging or a road that has a limited purpose and time. Other hands, yes.
Exactly how many stream crossings are?
Oh, for the upper one, I'll have to look at the evaluation matrix. I think it's some crazy number like 15 or 17. 19 stream crossings. And so what we would do for the upper corridor is you have stream crossings that are essentially an exaggerated culvert. They're those big culverts with the wide spans, and you bury them so that the fish can still get through and such. The contrast is, and this is one of the cost considerations that we talked about in our analysis, the conflict is for, I'm not doing it here, the lower route that's entirely on Gold Belt property. If you look at this route, you essentially only have one stream span, and it's Peterson Creek. We looked at the cost of building a span that we think could be permitted, one, for Peterson Creek, and it ends up being similar to 19 culvert crossings. So it's generally a wash, and we've gotten some other regulatory pointers that continuing on Gold Belt property may be a challenge due to Eagle's Nest and other considerations that that alignment brings up. Yes?
Okay, you know, the state is trying to give away a good bridge. Think about it.
We will. They're our partner, yes.
Is there an anticipated ferry terminal in this
The ferry terminal, I think, is, we're calling that a port. We're just calling it a deep water port. And the deep water port is further south than Middle Creek. It would be the next development section. So it's about 5 or 6 miles from the end of the road, where this phase just takes us about 2.5 miles. So the deep water port is for industrial purposes, maybe barges, maybe mining support, Lynn Canal, those types of things. And it would be a future phase, a couple miles down the road. Lynn, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
I guess what I'm looking at is if this plan just spreads us out even further, if we're looking for trying to develop stuff for the city and borough, wouldn't it make more sense to get that bench road in and start getting some affordable land out there now rather than just spreading the snow plows and everything out even more?
So, that goes back to my earlier point in that the purpose of this project is really not to gain access to municipal property. It's really to gain access to development areas for Gold Belt, and how they manage and dispose their properties is going to be up to their board to decide. We're not going to do winter maintenance out there. That's not going to change for us. And so the answer to your question is we don't see it as spreading ourselves further or diluting the amount of investment in community. We're seeing it as really kind of almost forwarding Gold Belt so that they can bring their properties online, and the city will partner for additional benefits in the later phases. Yes?
The environmental impact studies that were done for the golf course, I imagine that covers a lot of these 19 streams already. So are we going to be going back to the drawing board for these environmental impacts, or are those previously completed studies going to be useful for the city in going forward?
Yes, so we were able to access those studies, and they informed part of our analysis and review. We've shared those with the regulatory agencies. They require you to go out and do field tests to make sure that that information is still valid after a certain amount of time, and we've been working on that too. But it's a cumulative information that we've used and have revisited as well. Brad?
How much more on a per mile basis will it take to bring this Pioneer Road up to a state highway?
Well, I can tell you the rule of thumb for road building is essentially $1,000 a linear foot. And so to the amount that you can back out these Pioneer costs on a per foot basis, you're going to have, whatever that increment is for future widening and paving. So quite honestly, it's really the majority of the work that goes into establishing the corridor from a permitting perspective is done through the Pioneer Road. So when you come through later with construction, in theory, your permitting burden should be much less, and you should be able to get more road for your dollar at that point. But all said, it's probably, I would say, between about 50 and 60% of the cost will be covered by the Pioneer Road. Yes?
Years ago, there was talk of putting the airport on the backside of Douglas. Is this road going to interfere with that piece of property that they were talking about?
No, it does not. So this piece, as I was talking about earlier, is heavily constrained by the Peterson drainage, and so the airport corridor is further down beyond the drainages.
Because there was maps.
Correct.
One time outside of the airport they were talking about.
Correct. Yep. Yes?
Just wanted to say I applaud the city for pursuing housing, expansion of housing in the city. Is there any stimulus money that is, lends itself for this project, either now or long term?
Stimulus money, I'm not aware of. We can certainly investigate that. We've gotten stimulus money for what they determine shovel-ready projects, and this is not considered to be a shovel-ready project, but down the road in a couple years, it may be, and we may see a different opportunity. Yeah. Others? Going once, going twice, yes?
Yeah, how about the continuation? I know that's far in the future, but you're pretty much all the way around Douglas, and there's a lot of private property going down the Gastineau Channel. Is there any indication of who owns the property from the end of this extension around up through Gastineau to tie in all the way to Douglas?
So there are, in the very, very long-term plans, hope you can see that, yeah. In the very, very long-term plans, the city owns, I got to think about this. We own property that will take us all the way back around to Douglas. And the thought is, this planning area past Hilda Creek is probably, 100-year planning horizon. So if you want to go further generations out, that is the city's long-term plan. I don't think we expect to do disposals in this section, or maybe even in Gastineau Channel, but to reserve those properties similar to what we're doing here until we can get access and utilities and then do disposals over time. I mean, our land holdings, the way that we look at it, our land holdings are really supposed to last us for the next 200 or 300 years. That you don't want the city going out and buying land for community purposes. So that's the way that we manage 23,000 acres, is for multiple generations.
This generation has already run out of land to build on.
Correct. Correct. You're right. You're right. You're right. So I can close out there. I'll leave the offer on the table to come back and talk about buildable lands in the future, residential areas. Once we land on Schweitzer or Peterson, we can talk about what our development plans are there. I'm also working with a mining group that's looking at industrial land, not only city ownership, but industrial land throughout the borough, including up north in the channel. So I'll leave it on the table. Anytime you'd like me to come back and talk about land development, how it interfaces with the community and goals, I'm available.